This is Hooting Yard on the air. My name is Frank Key. It's a live show, so I think I should point out to listeners that I'm in an extremely grumpy mood today. And it's, I suppose, a measure of the self-sacrifice that I'm going to spend the next half hour trying to sound perky and cheerful as I read to you, rather than going into some kind of rant. Anyway, this is called Absence of Swans. There were barrage balloons in the sky on the morning when I decided to mesmerise a swan. I had been thinking of doing so for some time, for months in fact. The idea of having so savage a bird as a swan within my power enthralled me. Gerard Manley Hopkins famously mesmerised a duck on the 27th of April 1871, but I was going to go one better and entrance a large white swan. I filled my pockets with pebbles and pranced towards the pond, where I fully expected to find a few swans swanning about, one of which I would choose as my mesmeric subject swan. I looked up at the barrage balloons, wondering why there were so many of them in huddles just below cloud level. Was that the correct altitude for barrage balloons? I knew not. I had neglected that morning to wash my hair, and I'm afraid to say that it was disgustingly greasy as a consequence. And a further consequence was that as I made my way towards the pond, I was jeered at by a little tangle of hoodies who used the greasiness of my hair as a pretext to abuse me. I suspect that had I washed my hair, they would have lit upon some other feature, my carriage or my garments, or the scars on my face where I had been bitten by birds. Now, I've always found that the most effective way to deal with hoodies and similar riffraff is to visit upon them sudden, ferocious and inexplicable violence. So packed with pebbles were my pockets that I had no room that morning for hand grenades or pepper sprays or petrol-soaked rags, so my usual avenues of hoodie terrorising were closed. Instead, I ran at them, whirling my arms and screeching as loud as a sedge of bitterns. The bittern is one of the noisiest birds in the avian panoply, and its loud, booming call is one of the farthest travelling of all bird songs. The male calls relentlessly both day and night from deep within his reed bed, hoping to attract a female into his territory. My purpose, of course, was to repel rather than to attract, and in this I was successful. The hoodies fled from me, as I expect you would have done, for when I'm frightening, I am very frightening. Composing myself, I turned back to the path and continued towards the pond. It was a fine pond, as ponds go, the shape of a frying pan when viewed from above, as I had viewed it many times from hot air balloons and aerostats. It's many years now since I have been aloft. My physician identified a peculiar substance in my head which throbbed and became inflamed if I travelled much above sea level, so I took her advice, moved to a flat part of the country, and, with some regret, curtailed my aerial exploits. I feared that my close study of birds would be in jeopardy now I was forced for medical reasons to hunker close to the ground, but it soon became apparent that I still had numberless ornithological opportunities, given that many birds stick pretty close to the ground themselves a lot of the time, swans among them. To my utmost dismay, upon arrival at the pond, I saw no swans at all. This was most unusual, but I rapidly connected the absence of swans to the sight of black and yellow police tape reeled all the way round the pond, fastened to what I hoped were temporary perpendicular metal poles. Sometimes police tape is blue and white, and sometimes, as on this occasion, it is black and yellow. My idle fancy has always been that the latter colours are picked by a police bee enthusiast, but I'm sure there's a more sensible reason. I certainly wanted to know the reason for the appearance of the tape on the very morning when I planned to mesmerise a swan, and I looked around for a police officer whom I could bombard with questions. At the far side of the pond, I was delighted to see P.C. Nisbet, who was known to me personally. We belonged to the same branch of the Beige Cardigan and Trousers Club, and often sat within shouting distance of each other at club picnics. I shouted at him now, using my bittern boom, though in a friendlier way than I had deployed it against the hoodies, and I saw P.C. Nisbet cover his ears in shock. My, what large, irregular ears the man had! If he had been unfortunate enough to be born in an earlier and more brutish age, his ears would surely have been exhibited by a mountebank for money. I think he must have had a specially modified police helmet to accommodate them, but if so, it was a very clever modification, not apparent to a casual observer. I did not want to have to boom my catalogue of questions across the pond, so I began walking around it, towards the PC, and he too began walking in his policemanly way towards me. So we met up halfway, where there was a kiosk selling refreshments. I plumped for a tin of squelcho, and P.C. Nisbet, who confessed to being peckish, bought a tub of boiled fish parts. We settled on a bench next to the kiosk, but before I could ask him about the police tape and the absence of swans, he remarked upon the disgusting greasiness of my hair, and I had to explain that it had gone unwashed that morning as I was pressed for time. After upbraiding me and giving a long-winded alarum about the dangers of excess grease in the hair, he began babbling about the barrage balloons, which still loomed in the sky above us. I was impatient to change the subject, but P.C. Nisbet was a fiendishly difficult man to interrupt, for he never seemed to need to pause for breath, the words tumbling out of his mouth one after another like bats from a cave. Somehow he was managing to eat his boiled fish parts at the same time, which made his jabbering even harder to understand than usual. I began to despair, and wondered if I could stop him by pretending to swoon, so I dropped my squelcho and toppled off the bench into the muck at the pond's edge. This had the desired effect, although it meant that the grease in my hair was now mingled with mud, beetles and slime. "Why is police tape reeled around the pond, and where are the swans?" I rapped as I clambered back onto the bench. P.C. Nisbet took a deep breath and re-babbled. He told me that a terrible crime had been committed, and that shortly forensic officers in skin-diving equipment would arrive to drag the pond. The swans had been removed to what he called a place of safety. I wanted to know where this was, so I could pursue my swan mesmerisation plan without further delay, but the PC claimed not to know. Before dawn, he said, a squadron of bird management officers trained in swan removal techniques had descended upon the pond and removed the swans, using the techniques in which they had been trained. But where the swans had been removed to, and if or when they would ever be returned to the pond, and if indeed the place of safety was truly safe for swans, these were matters it was thought best not to divulge to an ordinary copper. From his fantastic ears to his unstoppable jabbering, there was little that was ordinary about P.C. Nisbet, but I took his point. If I were put in charge of a pond crime and attendant swan removal, I would not see the need to tell every last detail of the operation to a lowly functionary. But clearly I needed to eke from P.C. Nisbet the name and whereabouts of the officer in charge of the case. After much more babbling, I learned that this was Detective Captain Cargpan, and that he was, at that very moment, back at the station, roughing up a malefactor. I bid P.C. Nisbet farewell and set off hot foot for the police station. I was puffed out when I got there, and when I slumped against the front desk, was outraged to find myself placed under immediate arrest by the desk sergeant, a florid character with the eyes of a pig and the nose of a crow. I protested that I was a fine upstanding member of the local community and a committee member of the Beige Cardigan and Trousers Club, but to no avail. Snapping a pair of manacles on me and shoving me into a cell, the florid sergeant told me he was arresting me for entering a police station with grease, mud, beetles and slime in my hair, and for probably having something to do with the appearance of untold numbers of barrage balloons in the sky that morning. My request to send a desperate, heartfelt message to David Blunkett by metal tapping machine was met with a punch on the side of my head. This dislodged at least one of the beetles from my hair as the cell door clanged shut. What a predicament! I had got out of bed that morning with the innocent intention of mesmerising a swan, and now I found myself locked up in a grimy police cell and quite possibly due to be bashed about by Detective Captain Cargpan. I would have to admit the first charge, of course, but how would I be able to prove that I had nothing to do with the barrage balloons? I fretted and fumed, and then I remembered the pebbles packed in my pockets. So eager had the desk sergeant been to bang me up that he had not bothered to search me and to confiscate my pebbles. I realised that if I deployed them in a very clever way, I would not only be able to avert a roughing up by Cargpan, but I might very well manage to escape the police station entirely. There are thousands of very clever things one can do with pocketfuls of pebbles. That's the title, more or less, of an invaluable but out-of-print pamphlet by Dobson, which I have read many times and have almost by heart. For example, my pebbles were an essential part of the mesmerising of a swan, which is why my pockets were packed with them. Now, though, they would have to serve a different purpose. Having devised my very clever scheme, I did not waste a second and deployed the pebbles accordingly. 10 minutes later, I was scampering along the winding lane from the police station into the forest, a free man again. I made my way to the densest part of the woods, where the foliage was so thick that I could no longer see the sky, nor, as a result, could I see the barrage balloons, and this afforded me some relief. Their looming presence had cast a pall over the morning. I was famished and hankered for kippers, but I had to make do with berries and grubs. How long would I have to remain in hiding? I was sure that Cargpan would send a gaggle of bluebottles to flush me out. I had used all my pebbles in escaping from him, and the forest floor duff was singularly lacking in further pebbles. I ate some more berries and grubs and racked my brains for a plan, but I could not stop thinking about kippers. I wished I'd bought a spare tin of squelcho back at the kiosk, for I was thirsty as well as hungry. I sucked some moisture from a leaf. If only I had thought to bring my portable metal tapping machine, I could have sent a message to P.C. Nisbet. That man had a heart almost as big as one of his massive ears, and in spite of his infuriating babbling, he was steadfast and reliable. I recalled that he had once told me of his dallyings with telepathy, conducted after nightfall in his allotment shed. His sole success had been what he described as a rather unsatisfactory conversation with a weasel half savaged by an owl, but I wondered if he had made further progress since that breakthrough. Furrowing my brow and peering vaguely in the direction I thought P.C. Nisbet would be, were he still patrolling the pond, I aimed a message at him, imploring him to come and rescue me from the forest, to protect me from Detective Captain Cargpan's fists, and to feed me with kippers. An entire day passed before I was ready to admit to myself that the exercise was completely futile. At least I think it was a day. I was not wearing a timepiece, and I was enshrouded in the forest's gloom, so I became unsure of the passage of time. By my possibly inaccurate reckoning, I've been here for 3 months now. Every so often I have to hide from one of Cargpan's thuggish patrols. They pass through the forest, beating the trees with their truncheons and shouting my name. Once I was tempted to give myself up and to take what was coming to me, however unjust it was, but at the last moment I rallied my burning sense of foolhardy valour and hid myself deep in a brambly thicket. I am surviving remarkably well on a diet of berries and grubs and what moisture I can suck from leaves, although my cravings for kippers and squelcho are undimmed, and I suffer greatly, like a medieval saint. But I have a plan. I know that buried under the duff on the forest floor there must be pebbles somewhere. Every day now I dig for hours with my hands, and at the last count my stockpile had grown to 6 reasonably pebbly pebbles. It is only a matter of time before I have enough to pack my pockets full, and then I shall deploy them in a very clever way and emerge from the forest, and I shall stride majestically home and wash my hair, and then I shall refill my pockets with a fresh supply of pebbles and march to where I shall find some swans, and I shall mesmerise one of them and have it in my power. It will be interesting to see if barrage balloons still loom in the sky just below the clouds, or whether they have vanished away and left the sky clear and bright, an expanse of implausible blue. Excitingly, we had some slightly different theme music then. That was great. Maybe we should do that more often. This is called Tosspot In A Bivouac. Once upon a time, I was scrabbling down the lower reaches of a mountainside through shingle and scumble and bracken when I chanced upon a tosspot's bivouac. It was a surprisingly well-made bivouac, using branches from larch and beech and bladdernut and sycamore trees to form a roof upon which sufficient foliage had been impacted to provide sterling shelter from hailstorms and tempests, although the weather was in fact spectacularly clement. Clement, too, was the name of the tosspot, as I soon learned, for I immediately struck up a conversation with him, as is my habit when I encounter mountainside people. I learned that he had taken to his bivouac after fleeing. Fleeing from what? I asked, but he seemed reluctant to tell me. Someone with a less acute insight into human nature than I may have put this down to coyness, but I spent many years studying under Glaggy and Dempster, so I knew there was more than simple shyness behind his diffident mutterings, and I determined to winkle the full story out of him. So I grabbed the tosspot round the neck with one of my huge bear-like hands, lifted him off his feet, and shook my other huge bear-like hand, made into a fist, in front of his face. As Dempster taught, by attuning one's fist shaking to a very precise rhythm, the half-strangled subject is quickly placed in what Glaggy termed a confessional brain zone, akin to having been injected with a truth serum. As I suggested, it took years of training to perfect the technique, and I'm afraid a large number of fully strangled hamsters and stoats lie buried in the grounds of the Institute. 5 minutes later, I was fully apprised of the reasons why the tosspot had fled to his mountainside bivouac. He had been employed as an extra in a heist film set on a submarine. Sterling Hayden may have been involved in the production, but this was not entirely clear. What came shining through the tosspot's account, however, was the claustrophobic atmosphere on the set, which was actually a real decommissioned submarine. The tenebrous, leaking interior had been slightly refurbished to include heist movie essentials like an intricate security system and a safe full of gold bullion, but otherwise it remained cramped and hot and riddled with clanking machinery. After 6 days filming, during which time he had to lean against a damaged pump looking mordant, the tosspot had cracked. Tearing off his submariner's green tunic and cap, he stumbled out of the submarine, swam to the surface of the tank in which it was docked, scrambled up a ladder to the studio canteen, and fled until he reached the mountainside, where, with unaccustomed competence, he constructed his bivouac, using already fallen branches from larch and beech and bladdernut and sycamore trees, and the foliage thereof, where I bumped into him as I scrambled down from the mountain peak, upon which I had been making an invaluable study of the nesting habits of the mountain lopwit. Later, I was to discover that the continuity person on the film set, distraught at the vanishing of Clement the Tosspot and unable to find anyone of a similar physiognomy to lean against the damaged pump, looking mordant, advised the producer to abandon the project. It remained unclear whether this producer was Sterling Hayden or possibly Hume Cronin. Either way, the film was never finished. I put down the tosspot and gave him a look of reproach, and then I carried on down the mountainside in sadness and sorrow. And I had hoped, actually, to be able to read to you the script of the heist on a submarine film referred to in that piece, but alas, my plans were dashed. The film, as you know, was never made, but its ghost remains a fascinating exercise in the submarine-based heist genre. Although, from my close reading of the extant screenplay, it seems that the entire drama is confined to the interior of the submarine, and thus the viewer hardly sees the sea, the compaction of the maritime with the criminal has always held me in something like, but not quite, awe. Is it perhaps the contrast between the vastness of the broiling oceans and the small-minded pettiness of much behaviour out with the law? Or is it the admixture of scents, the salt tang of the sea mingled with cordite? A hoodlum aboard a boat inhabits an utterly different register to a gunsel in an urban alleyway, I think, if one can be said to inhabit a register. For the time being, it can be said, because I just said it, and believe me, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to the sea and crime. Many people, particularly tinies, are intrigued by pirates, and it's a particularly romantic vision of piracy that's called to mind when we think of marine criminality. For me, however, there's no such allure. My interest is rather in the trenchcoat, fedora and sneer type of lawbreaker propelled into a sea setting, in a dinghy battered by waves, say, or pacing below decks on a tramp steamer, or even forced to take the wheel of a tugboat when its skipper is felled by food poisoning. So a heist set on a submarine was always bound to appeal to me. Indeed, I'm surprised that I was not called on, if not to write the screenplay, then at least to act as a consultant. I'm sure I would have been able to provide valuable insights. I am not myself a criminal, and nor, interestingly, have I ever been to sea in any significant sense. Oh, I've paddled in it with my trousers rolled up and my boots and socks placed carefully on the pebbles, true enough, more than once. But I've never been to sea in the sense that, say, Joseph Conrad or Herman Melville went to sea. Yet I feel that had the producers of the abandoned submarine heist movie employed me, the film may yet have been made. I would, for example, have been able to give them quite a few tips about pumps. Authenticity is important when filming a submarine drama, whether or not it has an element of crime, and getting the pumps right can make or break success at the box office. If I'm not a sea dog nor a criminal, I certainly know my pumps. So, though I'm unable to read the screenplay to you here, as I'd hoped to do, I have read it myself, and it's signally lacking in submarine pump authenticity. The tosspot, used as an extra, you will remember, was to spend much of the film leaning against a pump, looking mordant. I do not quarrel with that per se. Tosspot sailors often have to lean against pumps in submarines, whether or not a heist is imminent. When they sign up, they know that's one of the things they may be called upon to do, along with the carrying of pails, the ringing of bells, and the polishing of the periscope with a rag. Never underestimate the importance of rags on submarines, by the way. Rags, pumps, the sea and crime. Those are my areas of hard-earned expertise. I learned what little I know in the school of rags and pumps and the sea and crime, that is to say, in everyday unlettered learning, in the town square of a foul and vinegary seaside resort under torrential rain, listening rapt to shorebound submariners who had polished many a periscope with many a rag in their time. Their testimony is often overlooked in our universities and think tanks, more's the pity. And before the end of the show, just time to bring you some news. One might think we had enough comms to be going on with. We already have sitcoms and rom-coms and div-coms and dot-coms, respectively situation comedies, romantic comedies, The Divine Comedy by Dante, and comedies about dotterels, the small wading bird of the plover family which breeds in the Arctic tundra. So it might be argued that yet another com is a com too many. Normally I'd agree, were it not that the latest com is the Frack Com, a series of comedies about old farmer Frack. As these are chiefly written by the best-selling paperback author Pebblehead, I suppose they might equally well be called Pebcoms. No doubt one or other term will win out as the common usage, much as we say ping-pong rather than gossamer, and lawn tennis rather than spheristike. It could be argued that there is little humour to be found in the perpetual trudgings of a mad old farmer driving his bellowing cows from field to field pointlessly in all weathers through all the hours God sends. In fact, that's a view I have myself favoured, as explicated thoroughly in my 6-part television series Penitence and Farm Implements, which insists that farmyard life is miserable and grim and despondent and hateful and wretched and disgusting and absolutely without comic possibility. But I reckoned without the skills of Pebblehead, whose hilarious accounts of old farmer Frack driving his bellowing cows from field to field pointlessly have me slapping my sides and gasping for breath. The original books, of course, are known as Farmyard Lit, and it is the films and TV series based upon them that are called Frackcoms or Pebcoms, and it's important to get this terminology right. And that's all from Hooting Yard for this week. I'm a bit more cheerful, in fact much more cheerful than I was at the beginning of the show, so I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're more cheerful too, if you weren't before, and I'll be back next week. Bye-bye.